Well, I'm going to ask the esteemed panel to join me over here on this very comfortable sofa. Thank you all for paying attention. Yes. I believe there should be some microphones, and we can pass them around as well. We have 3. Please. I'm sitting on one. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Welcome to our session on technology and innovation for sustainable development. I'm Richard Wolfram from The Guardian, and I will be moderating these very fine people who don't need much of an introduction, but I'm going to start anyway. So on my left here, Jean-Philippe Courtois. Did I do that right?
Yes, right.
Executive Vice President and President of the National Transformation Partnerships at Microsoft. To my right, Professor Dr. Sanjeev Kagram, Director General and Dean of the Thunderbird School of Management at Arizona State University and the Foundation Professor of Global Leadership and Global Future, also an advisor to the Kenyan government. Welcome. Sitting next to him, Joachim Reiter, Chief External and Corporate Affairs Officer and Executive Committee Member at Vodafone Group. And finally, Nena Stojilkovic, almost right, I don't know. Undersecretary General for Global Relations, Diplomacy and Digitalization at the IFRC. To begin with, some general comments, but to give it a little bit of focus. Technology and the SDGs. We often think about the SDGs as being quite concrete and dealing with people obviously living in poverty. So I think for many people there may be a gap in what they expect, what we think of as technology and the SDGs. So just to kick us off, how do you see these two things playing together, technology and the SDGs?
I think at the core, at least, what we are trying to do is to build on our mission as a company. Our mission is to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And you see, when you think about the UN SDG goals, there's a lot of people to empower more on the planet. So as a company, what we're trying to do is bring the best of what we need to do as a company, which is R&D, which is cloud AI innovation, which is partnerships, which is funding as well, which is coaching for our people, to do more in 4 of the UN SDG goals: quality education, earning trust as well, protecting fundamental rights, and decent economic growth. Mm-hmm. So that would be the umbrella of what we try to do.
Okay. Nena, how about you?
Thank you. My response will be through the lens of my organization, which is the largest humanitarian network in the world, present in millions of communities through our 17 million volunteers. To me, SDGs will not be possible if we don't include all these people who are often left in last mile communities and often most impacted by disasters. And our volunteers are there before, during, and after crisis. So to me, technology, if used properly, can actually include this mostly excluded population and most affected population into solutions around water, solutions around food security, and of course inclusion around gender equity. So there is no SDG that cannot be touched through technologically advanced inclusive programs that organizations like mine can stretch to the last mile.
Joachim?
I agree with the previous speakers. Very simple. My background, I used to spend some time in the UN. And in the UN, I was there when we negotiated the SDGs and we agreed. And it's interesting that we all forget goal number 17. And 17 are the enabling levers, of which one is technology. And I think it's fair to say that in the situation we find ourselves in now, where we are off track on the SDGs, the responsibility on all of us, including corporate sector, is to think hard, how do you mobilize the enabling levers, of which technology is a crucial one, to achieve all of the SDGs. And as a company, we have the purpose of connecting for a better future. And we are basically about democratizing other people's technologies. Mm-hmm. So when Microsoft invents something, we are often the ones that are provided to the general population. When Google invents something, we're the ones that to provide the general population. So for us, it's inherently logical that technology is going to be one of the main leapfrog opportunities to actually put us back on track to get to 2030.
Sanjay?
Yeah, let me build on these three wonderful speakers, and thank you all so much. Actually, before I took on the current position I have that you mentioned, I founded and launched something you'll know, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, which was the largest SDG partnership. Microsoft was one of the founders, Vodafone, and IFRC. And so we know that you have to harness the data revolution. And then what happened was this fourth industrial revolution, or whatever you want, fifth wave of innovation. And building upon that, all of these technologies are transformative if used wisely, with a set of ethical principles and a set of regulatory frameworks that can empower people and advance the world. So I hope we can get to some cases that we can share on that.
I'm sure we will. Jean-Philippe, these are obviously huge problems, challenges. We are off track. When we think about the partnerships needed to deliver on some of these technological solutions, what would you have in mind?
What I have in mind is different kinds of partnership. One which we strongly believe in is partnership with entrepreneurs. As a matter of fact, I've been sponsoring for the last 15 months now a global initiative called Entrepreneurship for Positive Impact. And we have some of those entrepreneurs in the room, like my friend Carl over there, Vector Center. What is it? It's our vision that you have actually a lot of change makers in the world. They could be called social entrepreneurs. They can be called now as well, I believe, impact entrepreneurs or tech startups that are building solutions enabled by technology to respond to the UN SDG goals. So what we've done, we've been working with all the ecosystem you can find in the world, like Ashoka, like the Schwab Foundation, NASDAQ Center, I was yesterday at the Tony Elumelu Foundation, who's doing a wonderful job with entrepreneurship in Africa. And then what we do, we bring those entrepreneurs on board in this initiative. We enable them through innovation. We just did a big hackathon in our company where we had like 1,000 employees helping 20 of those entrepreneurs to use generative AI to innovate in the different causes of the SDG goals. Number two, we're creating also connection with our people with a coaching, mentoring program that people love, because not only they coach, they actually learn from the entrepreneurs. And number three, which to me is the most important thing, we want to help those entrepreneurs to bring their products to the market, to sell it. So it's not philanthropy which is important, it's entrepreneurship to get a real solution for the future, very fast coming CSRD stuff in Europe as an example, where you need to report and respond to all those hundreds of KPIs on biodiversity, on waste management, on diversity through entrepreneurs. So that's the kind of partnerships, among a few others, which we love driving because that innovation is coming from the ground up, from Africa, from Asia, Latin America, and the US, and Europe, and it can be scaled. And it could have a wonderful impact through the large corporates as well, and governments and public sector.
Fantastic. I want to pick up that, Joachim, the idea of things coming from the ground up. The SDGs make it sound like things are quite generic, but actually these are all community-based challenges. So how do we engage local communities when it comes to the technology solutions?
So there's a lot of myths around technology. So let me dispel a few of them. And Vodafone is obviously present in Europe, but we also have a very significant presence in Africa. Most of our tech innovations as a company comes out of Africa. We are already at the point where we export our innovations, technology innovations, done in partnership with oftentimes small companies, small digital-first native companies in Africa, and we now export it to Europe. So there's an incredibly vibrant scene in Nairobi, as well as in South Africa around these things. Concrete example, M-Pesa. M-Pesa, which is now a massive mobile money platform. We have 56 million customers on it. We have 26 billion transactions. It's 2.5 times the size of Amex in terms of number of transactions. I mean, basically it was a few persons in Vodafone, together with UK government, together with some entrepreneurs in Kenya that started envisaging how could you actually build a mobile money platform. Today, everyone knows what mobile money is or electronic payments, but at that time, it was truly revolutionary. And if you look at most of the stuff we do in terms of technology evolution is based on working with the local community, say subsistence farmers, building a digital platform for subsistence farmers so that they can then reach the big purchasers like Unilever and Nestle through that platform and increase their yields. So it all starts from understanding the problem that the community is faced with, and then find a combination of low-tech, mid-tech, and high-tech to devise the solution. So I think the opportunities are immense. The level of willingness to innovate is incredible, particularly in some of the poorest countries we work in. The degree of entrepreneurship is there. Most of the stuff that we innovate with is actually not high tech. We're not dealing with generative AI, that type of thing. We're talking about brick and mortar technology, but it has an incredible impact once you adapt it for the actual technical capability as well as the needs that sit at the local level. It's all about localizing technology, less about thinking about it as a global trend, more about embedding it into the local fabric.
Nena, when you're working on the ground here, working with lots of different stakeholders, can you think of an example of how the collaboration works in practice that is, real world impact?
No, absolutely. And before that, for us humanitarians to do that work on the ground, on the SDG 17, we absolutely have to link our funding to that one of the development banks and those who can create connectivity in the countries and in the communities that we serve. Without connectivity, and Kenya is a great example where things worked, we would not be able to go very far. So in my mind, we should not forget the bigger goal, right, to connect countries in Africa and many other remote places, so that we can then develop solutions around those. In terms of the pure humanitarian work, we're developing something called Digital Engagement Hub together with Norwegian Refugee Council and Twilio. It always takes a private sector company, of course, to provide the solution and to innovate with us. This allows us to record needs of the communities online, which would then be received by us and our volunteers on the ground. Those services would be provided, and the same tool, the hub, allows us to get the feedback, which is a very interactive way of serving the communities and engaging in an inclusive way local communities. The second example is cash provision to Ukrainian refugees. We worked with Red Rose, leveraging their experience in the US, MoneyGram as well for the financial solution, Twilio again, to register. We were able to register 20,000 refugees in 14 days, and in some places the registration actually goes person to person and it takes forever, right? In this particular case, by using the platform, we were able to register 20,000 people in 14 days and to provide cash, humanitarian cash to them to serve their immediate purposes. And talking about Kenya, I'm very proud of what Kenya Red Cross has done and is doing. For example, given the large young population with penetration of mobile phones, they're doing incredible tele-service on mental health with young people, which is a simple service, but can save a lot of lives and use mobile for it.
Great. Sanjeev, there's a lot of discussion about the digital gap. We're obviously in a very privileged position having this discussion, but concrete solutions for bridging the gap. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? What are the policy prescriptions?
No, I think we're actually doing better, but we have a lot more to do. I just want to say that as a refugee, I want to thank you for your leadership and work. I'm from Uganda and Kenya. We were expelled from Uganda in 72. I want to mention 3 examples. Number 1 is our 100 Million Learners Initiative. Around the world, there's 3 billion people looking for access to digital entrepreneurship, innovation skill sets. We can't build infrastructure fast enough to get to them. So it has to be digital, it has to be online. Number 2, we can't just teach in English or French or Spanish or German. We have to speak in local languages. We have to teach in local languages. Number 3, we have to make it low or no cost. So our initiative is to reach 100 million learners around the world with digital entrepreneurship skill sets for the 21st century, 100% synchronous online, self-paced, no cost to the learner, and translated into 133 languages. We built with Google the world's first ever academic translation factory. We have gotten lots of great philanthropic support and technical support, and 70% of the learners will be women and young women and girls. And if you think about that, 100 million learners seems like a big number, but it's only 1/30th, 3% of where we really need to get to, and if we do business as usual. So 100 million learners is one example where we're closing the digital divide, because these are the skill sets that Microsoft is gonna need and Vodafone's gonna need, and even the Red Cross is gonna need. So that's number 1. Number 2 is around carbon removal. We don't get, and Microsoft's been a real leader on this, and we're grateful to their leadership on it, and Vodafone as well. We don't get to 1.5 degrees, let alone 350 parts per million or less, unless we remove 200 gigatons plus from the atmosphere. Carbon, what we have to do is planetary waste management. 95% of the carbon is already in the atmosphere. What it turns out to be is that there's different types of solutions, natural, engineered, and ocean-based. But all of those require digital technologies. All of those actually they're all hybrid. And the exciting thing, it could be the greatest market for people in Kenya. We've talked about Kenya a lot, but all over the global south for green growth, new jobs, sustainable livelihoods. So these are two very powerful examples where ordinary people in poverty that you started with, all over the world can benefit from technology and ensure that we're saving our planet and ensuring prosperity.
Sorry, can I build on that? Because you asked a pertinent question on digital gaps, and it's useful to put it in context. So we have 2.7 billion people that don't have access to the internet. This is not a small number. It's a massive number. If we were going to meet by 2030 for everyone to have access to the internet, it basically means we have to connect 1 million persons per day from today until 2030.
And how are we doing on that?
Well, we're not doing well on that. And there are two things that we need to fix collectively to achieve that. One is that we need to have a fundamentally different investment and funding strategy for digital connectivity. So this is a brick and mortar. It sounds boring, it's essential. This is what you build all the digital tooling on top of. Second is that we actually need to have a change in business models. So if you take Vodafone, for example, we are now partnering with space companies because that last mile in rural Africa, most likely we're going to have to innovate with new technologies, leveraging the satellite technology combined with the terrestrial network to cover those people. So there's a need for really understand how significant that challenge is. Point number one. Point number two, that's on connectivity. Point number two on cooperation, which rightly were pointed out. Even if you connect people, they don't have access to the internet unless they have a smartphone. And smartphones are prohibitively expensive in most of the poor countries around the world. So there is an absolute need for all large companies and all large tech companies to come together and crack the issue of how do you put a smartphone in every person's hand around the globe? Because otherwise, even if they have connectivity, they're not going to use the connectivity to transform their life. And then finally, to Sanjeev's point, which was spot on, is around the capabilities. The digital skills, the ability to use the power of technology comes from actually understanding how do you leverage it in your life. And for us, if you have the connectivity, you have cracked the collaboration around making smartphones available, that's when you put in then the capabilities around upskilling people, around creating the right locally relevant platforms. And then you get a virtuous circle where people have become more and more productive, more and more participatory in drawing the benefits of digital technology.
If I could just build on this,
please.
Okay? So one step towards that is with African Development Solutions, our partner, we're just about to launch a massive project with the International Postal Union to basically convert the post offices in Africa into e-hubs, e-government, e-services, e-learning, e-health. Now, when you do that, you have an incredible access way to get lots and lots of people to have this digital connectivity while the companies and governments are doing exactly what was just said, creating the access through satellites and so forth and so on, smartphones and other technology that people have in their hands, and the capabilities that give them not only the knowledge but the confidence. But this approach is really exciting because it's a one-stop shop for e-engagement for all citizens across Africa, and it's going to be transformative.
I don't want to ignore you behind my back here. So, digital gap. What's the Microsoft view of this?
Well, I think a couple of things. I would just add to what was said about the skilling. I mean, the task we have is huge. So we've been building a very extensive curriculum of skilling from entry levels, particularly these days on AI, to demystify AI and bring AI into the hands of the people who have no clue, who have no access. We had a great example of that in India, of an application using, of course, the best of generative AI. In one of the dialects in India, it's called Jugalbandi, and it's helping a farmer in a very remote village to talk to his phone in his language, one of the dialects, to get that translated, of course, in English, to get the query all the Indian bureaucracy government basically schemes and subsidize, and get back to that farmer with the voice to tell him where to apply and how to apply and how to get access to the money. So that's an example among many where we love to democratize that access. And I think this is where partnership both with entrepreneurs, I'm a strong believer in entrepreneurs, that's good here, also government and organizations, of course, like UNESCO, UNICEF, who work with them as well to propagate to different hubs those curriculums at scale. That's super important. So those would be, I think, some of the critical things. I also believe there's a big role to play in terms of being at the table of that responsible AI. Because we all know AI is fascinating, and we have probably some optimists on this sofa who are believing in the good aspect, good side of AI. But it's true and fair to say there's a lot to be done to govern AI in the right way. So we're also actively involved with many governments, many stakeholders to define to actually not just define, to work on making in a very concrete way, making AI ethical, making AI transparent, making AI accountable, making AI inclusive. How do you do that? How do you provide basically the guardrails, what we call the safety brakes, like we had in the very first I think lifts that were industrialized, the government has to have some safety brake in case it crashed. Well, we need to have the same on AI controls and get the governments to basically have access to that. Have access as well to the intrinsics of the AI coding to make sure it respects the command level. So anyway, I wanted to add that to the conversation because in a way, that technology is going to be very pervasive to all the people who can have access to it, of course. But we've got to find a way altogether to make it actually ethical and responsible in the way it lands.
Nena, I think we have the largest number of displaced people in the world since the Second World War. How on earth do we deal with connectivity issues and smartphone, usage when we have tens of millions of people who are living in displaced positions?
110 million people, the number, the largest ever, I think, in the history for all kinds of reasons, and we expect that to be even worse with all the climate change disasters. We just saw what recently happened in Libya and then natural disasters such as in Morocco. I don't have a perfect answer to this. There is SDG 17 that should be driving us all to the same direction. I think each of us in our respective area of responsibility has to do our part. When you turn it around, you actually can hope that with the penetration of mobile technology, with some of the digital platforms, the registration models for displaced people that I talked about, that all leverage technology, that we will actually be better at reaching all of those people who are on the move through some new ways and also with what they really need. The point that I wanted to make is very often we create solutions for the people. We actually need to create solutions with the people, including with the people on the move.
Right. Okay, so I'm not sure if we do questions from the floor on this one, but I think we should. So have a couple of questions ready if you're so inclined. Milestones along the way. I know the SDGs in 2030, but let's say 5, 10, 15 years building a purpose-driven, purpose-first economy. What would you like to see along the way?
I'd like to see along the way is basically a strong alignment between financial success and impact. And I'm an optimist working in the corporate world for almost 40 years of my life. I believe that we are just starting to see a very significant shift in the corporate world, where for decades we've been discussing CSR and philanthropy, which I love, by the way. It's not a critique. But no, being myself on the board of a couple of large companies, I see the conversation shifting indeed to ESG. And the conversation is not just about compliance. Indeed, you've got to get this license to operate on the so-called non-financial reporting, which is happening, as I said before, it's happening. But you've got a real discussion aboard on the financial trade-offs, on the product design, on the supply chain, on the workforce agreements you have or that you don't know about, and all the responsibility you need to actually account for in your business strategy. So in the next 5 years to come, for your first milestone, I do believe that's going to be a forcing function to put at the corporate level those questions on the table. And I'm talking about corporate not because the corporate world is guilty for everything in the world and is going to be the only solution, but at the end of the day, corporates account for more than 65 to 70% of GDP on the planet and about 80% of employment. So if you've got to find solution for the world, people on the planet, I think the corporate world has to bring its fair share on the table.
We need more of those entrepreneurs.
Exactly.
Sanjeev, milestones.
I'd say three things. Number one, as an educator, we have to go digital in every way. We have to use new technologies like AR and VR and XR. We have to bring a lot more people into this world, and that's the only way we reach the 3 billion people that don't have access to education. And I think we can do not only 100 million, we could do by 2030, 500 million or more if we all brought our capabilities together. Number two, I said it at the beginning, we have to make carbon removal the third critical pillar of climate transformation, because it's not just about ensuring that we have a healthy planet, but it's creating one of the largest markets in the history of the world, $3 to $5 trillion a year, lots of jobs, sustainable livelihoods from smallholder farmers to tech CEOs. And number three, I would say we have to transform governance. And governance has to be purpose first, and that means as a dean of a global leadership and management school, we have to have purpose-driven global leaders for the 21st century, and we're far from that right now.
Joachim?
So I agree with Jean-Philippe and Sanjeev, so I don't have to repeat what they're saying, and particularly Jean-Philippe absolutely spot on. I think there's a real revolution happening in the corporate sector, and that's fantastic. What I worry about and what I would like to see, not as Vodafone, more on a personal level, I don't think we have the right crisis mindset. Politics is not geared towards dealing with boiling frog syndromes. And that's a fundamental misconstruct in societal systems. Because there are so many boiling frogs at this point that I'm genuinely worried what type of world my kids would grow up in. So I wish that while I'm still active in the labor force and I still have some influence, we can raise the bar of the level of mobilization that is required to start tackling seriously some of these things. And it actually is the one thing that keeps me up at night is, do we have the right attention? Do we have the right urgency in addressing some of these challenges? Because I feel a little bit we're kicking the can down the road year after year, which means that I'm worried that 10 years from now, we will have much of the same conversation as opposed to having properly started to resolve things.
I of course agree with all the other three esteemed panelists, but I wanted to bring another angle. We sit here in New York, sometimes in Geneva, sometimes in London, and we try to design and define things that will work in some of the hardest hit countries, either by any type of crisis. And so my vision or my dream or my organization's dream for the next 5 years would be to develop stronger local organizations. We saw during COVID that we could not fly around, we could not send teams to the ground. We needed local people locally to be able to provide the humanitarian services in our case. And I'm very proud of the partnership that we now have with Microsoft, 12-year multi-year partnership, hopefully Vodafone, where we want to uplift digital capabilities of 80 Red Cross and Red Crescent national societies around the world, around some of the core things that will make them stronger local actors so that they can respond faster, more efficiently and deeper with a deeper reach in their own local markets.
Okay. Does anyone have any questions? Or do I get to ask all the questions? Please.
It's more of a comment, and I applaud everybody willingness to do something great. Once upon a time, I came up with what you call the first humanitarian city in Dubai. And we kept working on this idea, but what shocked me the most, I worked very close with IFRC, UNHCR, all of them. But the shocking element, these organizations, they do their best, but what they lack is what you call emergency response units. When the crisis hit, you have 24 hours, 48 hours to do anything. And we were shocked that if you take 3 to 4 hours from the hit crisis, and I'm here talking about Dubai and Africa, we're shocked that there is no proper preparedness. And these guys, before the crisis, it will cost them, for example, 2 million or 3 million. But when the crisis comes, they pay 100 million. So one thing that I wish private and government is they need to be prepared. Prepared in what? Prepared in putting, and also the donor community should put small money. You know what, Mr. Dr. Sanjeev, it's the small preparedness that protect you from the bigger challenge. And that's what we saw in Libya, Morocco, etc. So this is one vision I aim and that to see.
Thank you. Yeah. You talked about, Joachim, the boiling frogs, but there is the challenge that these crises, they seem to be a surprise, but actually they're quite predictable now. And with some planning and with digital tools, actually we could maybe stop quite so many people becoming displaced or the digital divide getting worse. So there are crisis planning challenges that government and private sector have.
I think the question is well put. I mean, even inside a company like Vodafone, if we have a choice to put number of millions behind crisis prevention for something with a relatively high probability, but you don't guarantee it's going to happen, as opposed to take 2x of that when the shit hits the fan, unfortunately, the tendency is for the latter. And that's part of human behavior. But I do think that's part of our weakness in responding in the right way to what's happening to the world today. And I think we should be adult enough to talk about what's in our organizational setup, what's in our interactions, and what's in our collaboration that prevents us from spotting that the frog is about to boil. And that goes for a number of things that are happening in the world. So there's a lack of attention in my view. I don't have an answer to it. I see the same thing, and it frustrates me as well.
But can I just say something? I mean,
Please.
The numbers, you're absolutely right. I mean, if we invest $1 now into preparing for a crisis, we will save $6 to $7 later on in responding to this crisis. I think we're trying to make a shift on climate. The difference between mitigation and investment in mitigation and adaptation is clear. Of course, we are not prepared because we have not invested in adapting to climate change. We invest in renewable energy and things like that. So this week in New York, we're talking about how together different partnerships, private, public, can invest more in preparedness, at least for climate shocks. I mean, we absolutely have to do it.
I could just add to this, the Global Center on Climate Adaptation showed that it was a 1 to 3, 1 to 7 return on investment for investments in preparedness for climate shocks. So it's actually not only cheaper, it can actually create wealth if we do it right.
Jean-Philippe, sorry, I'm pulling you into this because you're spot on with the change in financial market. I think one of the big changes to move to crisis prevention or preventive action is if insurance companies in the financial industry actually put some big premium on not being prepared.
No, I was actually going to make exactly the same point, is we need to get... It's actually sad, to be honest, to see today that some of the largest, I would not name anyone, reinsurance companies have decided to opt out for a number of those risks. Not necessarily just this risk the gentleman was talking about. So this is a big issue in terms of who's going to finance that. Because it's all about risk management. Technology enables to actually predict more and more the scenarios. We have wonderful solution we put together, Microsoft, not just Microsoft, planetary computer and so on, using satellite image to give you an incredible, I was meeting with an entrepreneur in India in my last trip. They've done amazing work to predict one house, and a house being actually really in a place where people have barely a roof. They can actually predict, given the weather, the temperature, when you exceed like 40, 45 degrees to 50s, people are going to die. And they know when it's going to hit that street, not that just city, and when you need to evacuate the people. So the question is, who is going to fund for that so that you can actually take action before those people get to the hospitals?
I think we might have time for one more question before I hog the last one. Is there anything else from the floor? No. Okay, so my last question, let's try and end on a positive note about best practice. Something you would say, point to and say, this is what we should do more of Nena, do you want to start?
I think you ended up on the financing, and I have to continue on the financing side. There is not enough funding to do all the things that we talked about. So I would really like to have more collaborative models and financing mechanisms, innovative blended finance mechanisms, blending insurance solutions with some of the traditional grant government donors, etc. And we are experimenting on those with one of our disaster response funds that reaches people in 3 hours really on the ground with funds. But we need more in that fund. We need more of those innovative solutions, because grants that are coming to the humanitarian sector are simply not sufficient to cover all the needs, especially not on the preparedness.
You okay?
I think the magic happens when we do public-private partnerships. And before coming here, I was with Secretary of State Blinken, USAID Administrator Samantha Power, and they launched something called Democracy Delivers. So that's in those fragile democracies, how do we make sure that we quickly translate it into wins in terms of improvement of people's lives? And that's not going to be done by governments. It's going to be done in a partnership with the private sector. So they identify private sector partners that they partner with and deploy quickly. And it could be digital solution. In the case of Vodafone, it's about maternal health and how we use digital solutions to improve and avoid maternal mortality. And it has an incredible direct effect. But the magic lies not in necessarily what we do there, but the methodology. And I think that requires a cultural shift in government and in the corporate world, but it's beginning to happen. And if we can lean on that and build more of that public-private partnership, I think we're in a much better place.
Thank you. Sanjeev?
And I'll go back to my education background. The hope and belief is that we are going to create a next generation with the global, digital, entrepreneurial mindsets to take us forward in a purpose-first economy. Global, digital, and entrepreneurial, all driven by purpose. And I believe we can do that with the technologies we can harness when they're doing it for good, as opposed to bad.
Jean-Philippe, I think that teed you up
It's
nicely.
really hard, yeah. The only thing I would add actually to the last comment, which I love, I'm a strong believer, a practitioner of what is called positive leadership. And I'm a believer that this new generation of youth, I was actually spending my breakfast with a bunch of incredible young people from the We as a Family Foundation, WAF, also the Tony Elumelu Foundation, amazing female leaders who are part of this new generation of positive leaders who are building those impact entrepreneurships models for the future today, not tomorrow. So let's empower them, let's get them to grow at scale, and let's give them a seat at the table today, not tomorrow.
I love that. Thank you. That's a great moment to end on. Thank you all for your attention. Please join me in thanking the panel.
How about our great moderator? Yeah.